Adulting may not sound like fun, but when you're on a Chianti wine tour in the hills of Tuscany, it's not so bad.
You're listening to Travel FOMO, a podcast for people self-diagnosed with wanderlust.
This is the Travel FOMO podcast, and my name is Hillary Halton, and I am here with my husband and my wine connoisseur, and I can say that now, Jamin Houghton.
I don't know about connoisseur. I still think I'm a drinker level.
You do drink wine. There you go. So that works.
I know what different wines are now. I'm not sure that rises to connoisseur. I can say something other than, this is a white.
That's right. This is red. Well, we learned a lot while we were in Florence, Italy.
That's true.
And a lot of that came from the Chianti wine tour that we went on.
Yeah, great tour.
Epic.
A lot of fun.
Yes. You guys, we're in the 7th season of the Travel FOMO podcast. We are talking all about Mediterranean Europe. And today it's all about our time in Florence, Italy. Honestly, whenever I think of Florence, I think of a place that is very artistic, somewhat romantic. It's really got romantic vibes. I think that's when I stand out there on the Ponte Vecchio bridge and the sun is setting and everybody goes out for sunsets in Florence and sits around, and it's just, I don't know, it's got good vibes.
What do you think's more romantic? The Ponte Vecchio bridge in Florence or the Spanish Steps in Rome?
I honestly think the Ponte Vecchio bridge. What do you think's more romantic? Husband?
I would agree. I think the Ponte Vecchio bridge, being there with everybody just hanging out and watching the sunset and that whole thing is Yeah.
They're both great though.
For sure.
Both wonderful. Also, Ponte Vecchio is very social. Super social. Tons of people right there on the bridge and sitting all around it and on it, and it's like just the masses come out.
Yeah, people lining both sides of the river and the bridge.
Yeah. It's pretty lively, pretty loud actually, which is kind of funny that I call it romantic when it's so loud and tons of people, but it just feels like everyone knows hey, this is where we all want to be. This is the desirable place to be right now. It's also very touristy. Florence gets a ton of tourists.
Yep.
A surprising amount, actually, because I kind of think of Rome. Well, you said this. You said, think about when you talk to people who've been to Italy, how many of them are going to say Rome? They've been to Rome. And how many of them are going to say they've been to Florence? And, you kind of think more people have been to Rome.
Yeah, I think there's probably very few people that have been to Florence that have not also been to Rome.
Right.
And not any that have been the other way around.
Right. Yeah.
Not any that have been to Florence but have never been to Rome.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We came straight from Venice, and it was actually a really simple little train ride.
Yeah, that was a nice train, no changes.
And it was a nice
just
train.
Get on and ride the train.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really nice.
Our Airbnb was kind of right in the thick of everything. It was a good little spot geographically, and we had dinner. It was really good. It was a place that was highly recommended, and we went, and they kind of set us in what felt like the alley.
It did. It kind of felt like the backyard, like somebody's back patio.
Right. It's funny in Italy, I feel like anywhere that a restaurant can commandeer a piece of real estate, they'll stick a table on it.
Yeah.
And that's definitely what had happened here. There were a few tables out there, so it was intentional. We weren't Lady and the Tramp behind the restaurant, but it was a little bit that way.
So true.
But really good food. We went out and that first night to watch the sunset in Ponte Vecchio. It was really just amazing. Enjoyed walking around. There was live music playing. There was a guy playing a bucket.
That was crazy. Tell people about that.
Yeah, so there was this little band playing, and they had a singer and a guy with kind of a guitar, ukulele kind of thing. And then they had someone playing what essentially would be a bass guitar, but it was a bucket, a plastic 5-gallon bucket.
Yeah.
And it had a broomstick attached to it and a string
Yeah.
And he was plucking that string and playing the bass with it.
Yeah. Like he was literally finding the notes on this piece of string and figuring out the right notes to play. And he was playing it and it sounded good.
It did sound good.
That was crazy.
It was
an
really
orange bucket.
Interesting.
Like, it reminded me of like the orange 5-gallon buckets you buy at Lowe's.
Right. Yeah.
Or Home Depot.
Yeah.
So
just
crazy.
like an old bucket and a broomstick and a piece of string. Ready to go.
That was crazy.
Join
You can
band.
actually see that on the video that we posted on YouTube. You can see this guy just like playing a bucket. Like it's no big deal. So crazy.
Well, and then we made our way across the bridge. And because we were in Italy, we had to have gelato.
Yeah. We're like faithful gelato lovers, as is most anyone who comes to Italy.
I remember us having a conversation before we got into Italy. And you were like, I know that we only go out to eat in each city. We try to only eat out once and we only do dessert one time, but I think we need to do that differently in Italy and have gelato all the time. And that's what we did.
Yeah.
And it was a good choice.
We didn't regret it.
Yeah.
That was awesome. And we also walked it off. Oh my gosh. We walked it on.
Lots of steps, lots of heat.
Yes.
I feel like you just sweat it off.
Yes. Yeah. So I do not feel guilty about that.
Nope.
But we did try this really cool place that night. It was right across the river from the Uffizi Gallery. And it was a place called Cantina del Gelato. And it was a hole in the wall place that it was like kind of outside of all of the touristy area. Like there wasn't people out there. And we were the only two to walk in at that time.
Yeah, I was kind of doubting it because I was like, man, there's nobody in here.
Yeah. And then you walk in and you realize, like, if I remember correctly, it was like a stone ceiling and walls and everything. It felt very cave-like.
Yes.
A little bit. And there's this little Italian guy back there with his like nice black chef's shirt on. And you look and you think you're going to see all this gelato. And what you really see is a bunch of silver canisters where there's gelato down there somewhere, but you don't get to see the gelato. You just get to know what the different flavors are.
Yep.
And then he'll whip it out. And it reminded me of like when my mom used to make homemade ice cream. My mom and my aunts would make homemade ice cream every 4th of July, and it'd always be in a silver canister, and you had to open the lid to see what was inside.
Yeah.
And to see which flavor was which and everything. And it was just like that. Like he pulls out these long silver canisters and he dips out this like gelato, and you don't know exactly what it's going to be like before you buy it. But it was incredible and totally worth it. And do you remember what kind you got? You got like a really interesting kind.
I think I got 2 flavors, and I think I got like a chocolate chip, and then I got a dark chocolate.
Yes.
And the dark chocolate was almost black.
It was.
And it was really good. Like it was a very dark chocolate. Probably the darkest chocolate that I've ever had in like ice cream form. Because it's usually more milk chocolate and like sweeter. But this was definitely a very dark chocolate. It was really good, especially alongside the chocolate chip. Like the two went well together.
Yeah. And then like I remember getting fior di latte, which is basically milk, a milk flavor, which I had been loving. And so that was like, it was excellent. And then I also paired that with yogurt, a flavor called yogurt.
Oh, that's right.
And it was like different. It had like the tang of yogurt and everything, but it was good. Like no complaints. It was really good.
You know, they always say if you see a gelato place where like it's all like piled up, like mounded up really high, don't go in there. And because it's not as fresh. And this was definitely proved that opinion that like if you go in this place where it's down in little silver canisters and you can't really see it, it may not look as like appealing and catch the eye as much, but the gelato's amazing.
Yes. Yeah. And it's not all melted. It's like down there in the real frozen area. So it's like that matters to me with my ice cream. I really do not like melted ice cream. I don't like soft ice cream.
Well, then we were able to like just walk out like right outside the gelato shop and walk to the river. And we were kind of by ourselves because it was a little removed from everything. But just look out across the river and and eat our gelato.
I know. And I remember looking at the Uffizi Gallery and there's like a party going on.
That's right.
Kind of like in the gallery, but also in this kind of looked like a secret place down below, closer to the river, that it didn't look like you necessarily could get access to, anybody could get access to. And it looked like this really posh party happening. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And yeah, it was a really sweet night, you know?
Yeah.
That was cool.
Just another night in Italy.
Just another night in Italy.
Well, and the next day was time for a run.
Yes, which we do every morning.
Yeah.
Our first morning in every city.
First morning in a new city, time to get up and go for a run. But your allergies were really smacking you pretty hard.
I was down and out.
And so you did a sleep.
I did a sleep day again because we'd just been in Venice and I had skipped out on the run there.
That's right.
And you were loyal 2 times in a row without me.
Yeah, I really did not want to get up and go out, especially by myself. But I knew that the run that we had planned for Florence was going to be pretty great. And so I basically ran past the Duomo, then across the river, like across the Ponte Vecchio, and around kind of this neighborhood and park. You kind of run around up to the top of this hill where there's another park where there's another replica of the Statue of David, only it's bronze.
Oh, okay.
And it overlooks the city, and the view from up there is incredible.
So good.
Just incredible.
Yeah.
And there's footage of all that. If you go out and watch the YouTube video, you'll be able to see kind of what I'm talking about. But
yeah,
I was really glad I did it because we didn't have a ton of time there. We had a ton of stuff we wanted to do.
Yes.
So it was kind of the one chance to go to that park, and I was glad when it was all said and done that I'd done it.
Yes.
And I tried to run through another garden, but it was Italy and it's locked.
Oh, right.
Like there was another park that I wanted to run through, but it was all locked up. And in France, when we encountered that problem, France and Spain, they usually would be unlocked pretty early on. But this one, I think I saw a sign that it wasn't going to open until like 10:30 or something.
Oh,
so
wow.
It was just like, okay, run back home.
Yeah.
But it ended up being a pretty good run.
Yeah. It sounded like a hard one, though. I remember you saying like that uphill stuff was in serious business.
Yeah. Getting up to that park was brutal. It was a battle to get up there, but
impressive.
Gotta work off that gelato, I guess.
That's right. There was no way I could have done it. You guys, I was sick. I mean, at this point, I'm going to be really honest with you guys. This was like 2022, June. COVID is still around. Mm-hmm. And I'm starting to think to myself, oh dear Lord, do I have COVID while we're traveling around? Like, I'm just like starting to kind of like freak out because I'm really starting to feel it. And I was starting to feel like congestion and like a little bit of respiratory stuff. Yeah. And that could be like, it could be allergies, but it also could not be allergies. And so I was having to ask myself some serious questions and like, am I going to go to the doctor and like have them test me and find out, like, should I do that? Like, how serious is this? And I did know to some degree it was allergies though, because I think I was sneezing a ton.
Yeah.
So it kind of really started to relate back to like, and I could tell by it, like it was the season and it was like just a bunch of stuff that I was like, yeah, this all like really does relate to allergies. But then a lot of people think that too, and it ends up being COVID. So,
yeah. But I remember too, we talked a lot about like whether or not you had a temperature, and you never felt like you did.
Right. That's true.
So we felt like it was probably just allergies. And
I started looking up some natural remedies. So I was like, okay, what could I do? And it was here in Florence that I bought honey. I already had some sea salt, and so I had been gargling some sea salt and eating honey, like a teaspoon a day or something like that. It's supposed to help with congestion and some of that stuff. And it like started working, but it took a minute. So, yeah, that was like, oh man, but that's like a freaky feeling because you're like, am I going to get kicked out of the country? You know? And also, fortunately, most of the stuff we wanted to do was all happening like outside. It was
Right.
like, we're just going to hang out outside all the time.
Right. Well, and we did have a ton to do that day that
Yeah.
you ended up doing. Like you really didn't even sleep in that long, because I think we went on a walking tour, and I think that walking tour started at like 10 o'clock or something. Another free walking tour.
Another free walking tour. And we keep finding that the free walking tours are worth every penny.
Yes.
You really just, you pay a tip, and the tip is expected, and you pay the amount that you think that it's worth.
I consistently remember going into those thinking like, okay, this, it's this long, so I'll give them this much at the end of the tour if they do a decent job. And I think I always ended up giving more than the number that I originally had in my head because they were so good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And so they told us a lot about the history of Florence.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to share some of that right now, and I'm going to give Jamin full discretion to jump in and correct me because he retains information so good. So despite whatever notes I might have, Jamin's memory is always better than the notes that I take in the moment, which is hilarious. So Florence really started booming around the 1300s, and there was a economical boom due in large part to like the creation of wool that was happening there. The Black Plague hit Florence though in 1348, and I really made a note of that because rewind, guys should go back and listen to our Edinburgh episode because we talk a lot about the Black Plague and how it impacted Edinburgh and Scotland, and it is fascinating.
Yeah.
But it also impacted all of Europe. So Edinburgh wasn't the only place to get impacted. We talk about Florence being really touristy. One of the things that they threw out is that there are 75 different museums in Florence.
That's amazing.
That's a ton, and really tells you a lot about like, okay, well, that makes sense why it's so touristy because there's so many museums to see. Some of the things they also talked about a lot about was the Medici family, which you know a lot about already.
Yeah, so the Medicis, if you are not familiar, there's several, like there's a really popular Netflix show on about them, and they're really influential in Florence and really all of Italy, and really into the Renaissance and become a big part of that. So the Medici had money and found all kinds of ways to make more money. They were bankers, and so they would lend money to people, and that was a really controversial thing with the Catholic Church at the time, charging interest. The church kind of went back and forth on that a lot, and they refer to it as usury. And so it was something that would kind of be condemned by the Pope on and off. And
because it was like using people and like benefiting from others.
Right. So they were, they were giving out loans, and I mean, basically kind of creating like the initial way that banks make their money now.
That's crazy.
And so, they would do loans and charge interest, and that's how they got rich and made their money. And they were generous with the people of Florence at times, depending upon which Medici was in charge at the time. And so they kind of went through ups and downs where the people of Florence really loved them. And then that Medici would die and another would take over, and he would do some stuff they didn't like. And they got exiled from the city a few times. They ended up wanting to change policy of the Catholic Church, and they ended up with several of Medici family members becoming popes at different times. And so this just really influential family, and they are all over the city of Florence.
And you see like their symbol, their family's guild.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of guilds that were present in Florence, and the Medici's seal is on a lot of stuff.
Yeah, a lot of buildings.
Yeah, a lot of buildings and a lot of statues and monuments and stuff. There's stuff kind of all over Florence, which our tour guide pointed out to us when we would come across it. And then you really do start kind of seeing it everywhere, seeing that symbol on all kinds of stuff. And they even ended up funding a lot of artists, Michelangelo and things like that. And these wealthy families would fund these artists, and really that's how the Renaissance came about, was these really wealthy families being willing to fund these kind of art projects that would happen in these buildings and really the beautification of their cities. And it was really interesting to really hear about them and see physically the stuff that you hear all the stories and legends about on this tour, to have that pointed out, that like, here it is, like, here's their first palace that they built, and here's the next one, and just on and on and on. It was so fascinating.
Well, in one of those palaces, they pointed out how like the bottom floor was a little bit wider and kind of came out a little bit more than the middle floor, and then the top floor was a little smaller and a little more narrow, and it gave the illusion that it was even taller and more grand than it was. Which I thought was like a cool illusion. And then the part about like Michelangelo, I thought was really interesting. Would he have been discovered if it hadn't have been for them?
Right.
That's fascinating. Anything else about the Medicis? Because that's a really interesting family.
Well, they were behind the funding for the dome of the Duomo.
Oh, okay,
which has something that like hadn't ever been seen before. Something like that had never been built before, and so, you know, they didn't design it, but they were very instrumental in making it happen.
Yeah.
Which was really cool. And where we went like next.
Yes. The Duomo in Florence, you guys, is a big deal.
Yes.
It is one of the big things you have to go do if you go to Florence.
For sure.
Just kind of want to preface that for like, you know, if you are planning a trip to Florence, it's something you're going to want to spend at least half a day on probably.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
It's not super expensive to tour it and see different parts of it, but it does take time, and you do need to make reservations and get a pass and stuff. So
and they're timed entry tickets, and so that's really important because it is really crowded. A lot of people move through there, but it's amazing to see.
Yeah, we ended up doing a Ghiberti pass, which was like the baptistry of San Giovanni, the museum, and then the cathedral with the underground Santa Riparata, Santa Riparata, which is basically like this old cathedral. It feels like you're going down into a crypt. You can get access to the dome itself.
Yeah.
So there's other things you can do that are even more extensive than what we did.
In the museum, they have a lot of the original facade and like artwork and things like that are actually housed in the museum, so you can go there and see it. And the architect behind the dome of the Duomo was Brunelleschi, and inside the museum they kind of go into detail of like how it was designed and how it was built, and it's something that was started and they didn't know how they were going to build it, which I think is fascinating.
That's fascinating.
They're like, we're going to have to figure it out because the scale of it was so large. They were like, we're going to do this, but we don't know how.
Yeah.
And they ended up pulling it off, which is incredible and just a crazy story to me.
The way he did it was like using fishbone spiral with bricks, like using bricks and creating like a fishbone that spiraled, and that's how it like stays kind of. I just thought that it's fascinating because like if you go and look, like there's nothing holding it up, like it's and it was one of the first domes, right?
Yes.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and was the largest for a long period of time.
Yeah, that's
just
awesome.
a kind of an engineering marvel. So even if you're not super into churches and stuff, but you're just into architecture, it's really incredible building.
Yeah, I remember being so impressed by the facade, and like there are different pieces of it that like the outside of it was redone in like the 1800s or something like that. I feel like.
I think so, yeah.
And they moved some of the original pieces inside.
Yes.
Into the museum. And so you can go into the museum to see some of those. I will say the museum surprised me how much I liked it. It was pretty cool.
It was cool. And they have the original doors to the baptistry. are in there, these
Yeah.
huge golden doors.
Huge.
And they are, and just intricate scenes in every square of these doors.
Yeah.
And they're just massive and huge and incredible to see.
Yeah. Well, and what makes the museum so cool too is that you get to see a lot of pieces of the outside of the Duomo. You get to see it up close. It would be hard to appreciate those from way down below on the ground. But when you go into the museum, you get to actually see them up close, and you get to see like, oh, this is the story of Adam and Eve. And oh, there's another place where they have the other biblical stories unfolding, and you can appreciate those. And then you can go outside and see them on the front facade of the Duomo.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and they had that little rooftop part of the museum as well.
Oh,
where
that was cool.
you get to go, it's like 4 stories of museum, and you go out on this little rooftop and you see the Duomo in front of you because it's just across the street from the Duomo.
Yeah.
And so you see the dome and you see all of this that you've just learned so much about, and it's all there. And while we were there, like there were a couple of people out there when we first went out, and they went back in, and then it was just us for a while.
I know.
Some more people came out, and we were just able to hang out there by ourselves
And
with
take
this
pictures,
amazing view.
Unobstructed views of the dome of the Duomo.
Yeah.
With nobody else there.
I kind of thought we'd get out there and that would be where everyone was and that it would be packed, but it was empty.
Yeah, that was crazy. When we actually went through all of the Duomo, that was not necessarily part of the walking tour we went on.
Right, yeah.
But I will say one other thing about our time at the Duomo is we went to the baptistry, and I was surprised that the baptistry was disconnected from the Duomo itself. So you've got this church, but then like the baptistry isn't part of it.
You weren't allowed to go into the church, so you couldn't go into the Duomo until you were a Christian.
Yeah.
And so you would convert and then be baptized in the baptistry, the separate building, and then you could go into the church.
Crazy.
And the baptistry itself is this amazing, elaborate building that they still baptize people in. I think it costs a lot to get baptized in there, but they still use it for that on the special occasion that someone pays a lot to do it. It's pretty incredible.
That is incredible. And then one of the other places that they took us and we're talking about a lot on this tour was Orson Michel Church.
Yes. One of the first 3D sculptures is there. And, when you think about what art was like used for a lot in that time was storytelling. When you think of a time where most everyone is illiterate, there are very few people that can read.
Yeah.
And so they would create art essentially to tell stories.
Yeah.
And if you think about being back in a time where you couldn't read and you're just kind of having to picture these things that people are telling you, and you've got like 2-dimensional art to look at, and then someone introduces you to a 3D sculpture that looks like it's alive, just how like mind-blowing that would be.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible when you like really take it into the context of what it was.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine seeing something like that for the first time without access to anything else, and then you see that it just had to be mind-blowing.
Yeah, I think so too. I thought that was really interesting, and such a consistent thing that we saw throughout Europe was there would be stained glass windows, and it would be just incredible stories on the biblical stories on these stained glass windows. And then someone would reiterate on a tour, they would say the reason these stories are there in visual form is because people couldn't read, and they had to be able to tell them scripture in a way that they could remember.
Yeah.
And that's why they do that. And I just think that's really interesting. And I don't think a lot of people know that. I think it's fascinating.
I don't think so either. And when you think about like art, especially like being built into a building.
Yeah.
If you think about like how interesting would it be if the buildings that we built now still told stories.
Yeah.
Still told readily apparent stories.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of like stuff that gets designed, and once it's explained to you kind of in depth, you're kind of like, oh yeah, I guess I can kind of see that. But if it was in a way like this, where it's like, no, this is obvious, this is what it is, and you can walk through something and learn something from a building.
Yeah.
It's what makes Europe so much different to me than going other places.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely.
If you're listening to this, you like a good adventure. And if you like a good adventure, you might enjoy following the fights. It all started with Mars and Ashley's bold decision to travel full-time in their converted Sprinter van. Fast forward 6 years, they've seen all 50 states and backpack countries like Thailand and Guatemala. It's been one daring decision after another, and now they're braving another big adventure, building a creative retreat in the Colorado Rockies. Find out what life could be like when you take risks. Follow the fights on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok.
One of the other really popular places in Florence is the Piazza Della Signoria, and it is the oldest square in Florence. And surprisingly, it actually looks like one of the newer squares. It was renewed in 1895, which is really recently in Europe's scale of timelines. Somebody, I guess the tour guide was telling us that they call it Disneyland because it's not very authentic looking to them, which I thought was really funny. There is an open air museum that is free for people to come see. You just kind of walk up and it's right there and you will not miss it. It's got sculptures. It's got this beautiful arched awning covering it. And these sculptures, one of the ones that really sticks out is one of Medusa's head being cut off. And it's really kind of like you just look and you go, oh, what's this one? Oh my gosh. And it's Medusa's head being cut off. It includes the artist's face, though, on it, if you look closely. And if you look at the backside of the helmet on that one, there's like the artist face, which was like really kind of like, whoa, that's fun fact.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And like, until someone points it out to you that it's there, you don't see it.
Right.
But then once they do, it's all you can see.
Yeah. I feel like you hear that a lot too with different artists, how they like incorporate their own face, which I just think is interesting.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting too, to like put yourself in it.
Well, there's also the Ponte Vecchio, which is the old palace. The mayor has a room inside that palace, and it's actually a really cool. We went inside that one, and it's pretty cool. And then there's a replica of the statue of David that's just outside the palace. This sculpture was one of the only biblical sculptures in this vicinity. I guess they considered it a symbol against the Medici family because they were seen as Goliath. And so to have like David as a sculpture is like kind of a big deal, which wasn't it Michelangelo who did David?
I believe so, yes.
So you got Michelangelo's David going against, in some way, kind of going against the Medici family who gave him his start, right?
Yes. And some people think it's the Medici. Some people think that it's Rome. Because he faces south toward Rome, and so it's this David Goliath thing against Rome.
Well, and the original David statue is actually in the Accademia Gallery, but it's still there in Florence. It's just in the Accademia Gallery. So what you see here in this plaza is a replica of David's sculpture.
Yes.
So one of the things I love about Italy is the public drinking fountains that they have. And you can get drinking water for free in Italy. So easy. People complain that you have to buy water in the restaurants, but you should know you can get it for free pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, just take a bottle with you.
Just bring your own bottle. And in Italy, some of those fountains have sparkling water.
Yes.
Which is amazing.
Yeah, and really good.
Yes. And these aren't always like the most beautiful fountains. They're like literally like a water fountain, like you think of maybe not really like at a kid's school, but like, it's like a fountain. You go press a button and water comes out.
Right. Yeah.
So, but this is one, there was one there in that palazzo that I thought was like, oh, this is really helpful. And it had sparkling water. And I was like, that's nice. But it's literally built into the wall of the palace.
Yes.
Which blows my mind that they would cut out a wall or cut out part of the wall of the palace to put in a water fountain.
Yeah, it is kind of mind-blowing that they would do that, but they did. And the water's good.
And people love it. I mean, it's in exactly the right spot. Like, it's perfect. So, and I just think free sparkling water is a big perk of Italy. So, and also right there, you'll find the Uffizi Gallery is right there too. It's really close to all of this is also really close to the Ponte Vecchio bridge, which is beautiful.
Yes.
Very scenic. The Uffizi Gallery is the most visited museum in Italy. I just want to stop for a second and think about that.
Yeah, not in Florence, in Italy.
In Italy.
Yeah.
Meaning that it has more visitors than the Vatican does.
Yeah.
The Vatican Museum and the Sistine Chapel and St. Peter's Basilica and all that stuff in Rome. No, the Uffizi Gallery has more visitors than that every year.
Yeah, that's just incredible.
Yeah. Florence is really cool because things didn't feel too spread out from my perspective. It felt pretty tight. Yeah,
it's all kind of right there. You're not walking very far at all.
Yeah.
And then after our walking tour, we went to the Mercato Centrale Firenze.
Yes.
So it's like the central market, and so there's a big established building that is the market with all kinds of stuff inside it, but all around that, people set up shops under these awnings and tents and booths, kind of surrounding it. All kinds of Italian leather stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in the market for a bag or a belt or a wallet or anything Italian leather, it's all there. It smells like Italian leather, which is kind of incredible. And so we walked all through that, saw a lot of that.
That was
lunch
really cool.
In the market. So steak is really big in Florence, Florentine steak.
Yes.
And so it's a massive steak, and we really wanted to get Florentine steak. And I asked hey, is this sign correct? You have to order it in this size. There's not a smaller version. And they're like, no. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll take it. It's a 1.5 kilo steak.
Oh my gosh.
Which is a little over 3 pounds.
Yep.
Of steak. And it's a T-bone steak, essentially, very, very thick, probably 3 inches thick. And they cook it medium rare, and they slice it up into slices and kind of pile it around the T-bone on a plate and put really thick salt on it, and like a sea salt almost, and it is amazing.
It's really cool. It's Florence is known for this steak.
Yes, yeah. The Florentine steak is a huge thing there. It's expensive and it's a lot of steak. And so I started to not do it. I'm so glad I did. This steak was incredible.
Well, and this was not a steakhouse. Why don't you tell them more about the actual scene of this moment?
Yeah, it's just in the middle of this market. There's 2 levels of this market. So it's inside, up on the second level. And it's really just this U-shaped kind of bar almost. Yeah. It's not this fancy thing. You just sit at this bar and have your steak, and it was really, really good. You had tartare there, right?
I had some meat as well. I had some beef tartare, and you might be thinking it's kind of like tuna tartare. It is, except it's beef, guys. And looking back, I'm like, oh, that was really raw. Some raw beef that I had.
Not cooked at all.
No.
None.
It was completely red, cold.
Yeah, cold.
Red, cold meat. And it comes stacked, just like you would imagine tuna tartare if you were at, eating sushi or something. I tasted a lot more olive oil even than meat, but I didn't get sick, which is kind of amazing. I was in a market. I'm just sitting here at this bar, and I can see the mop and where they mop the kitchen right in front of me. And I was eating beef tartare, raw beef.
Yeah.
In this environment. That makes me a little nervous now. And I'd never thought of it until that moment I'm telling you about it yesterday. And I'm like, this is not the best setting. And we had gelato again.
Of course.
That night because Italy. But again, they had the gelato stored away in stainless steel containers where you couldn't see it before you bought it. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and
that
again,
happened.
really, really good.
Yeah, it happened both of the times we had gelato in Florence.
Yeah. Well, and the next day was a really big day for us, a really full day, because that's when we took our Chianti wine tour.
The Chianti wine tour, guys, this is the big piece of our trip to Florence, was this wine tour that, how did we go about booking this?
We booked it online. So there were a few things that I knew like we really, really wanted to do. And this was one of them that we're like, we're going to spend the money. We're going to be in Tuscany. We're doing this tour. And it's a safari wine tour because they took us out in this big, like kind of army truck, almost like bus, but the seats were really nice and it was air conditioned. And we like walked out and met the rest of the group. There was probably 15 people on the tour.
Yeah, probably
something like that. And that's about what this bus would hold. And they took us all over Tuscany. We went to several wineries and we tried wine and olive oil and had lunch, and it was incredible.
Yeah.
I mean,
we even booked this like 6 months in advance. Like,
yeah,
we booked it way far out because we knew the Tuscan like wine scene. We definitely wanted to hit that up.
Yeah, I feel like there was a lot of stuff that we're like, well, we're going to do this and we can figure it out and we could be flexible about it. But this was one that we were like, no, this is the thing that we really want to do. So we circled it in advance and really went for it and did it. We went to Villa Le Corti. I think that was the first stop, and we got to tour the winery a little bit, and we saw the vineyards, and they took us in where they process the wine and kind of talked us through how it works. They have some like stainless steel vats, and then they put the wine into barrels. Some of the wine there, they age in concrete vats, which I didn't know was a thing. But, and then we got to do a tasting there. The wine was really good. We had like a rosé and a Chianti Classico and a few things like that, and some wine and cheese plates that they had made up. But
you got to start making friends.
yeah, got to really start talking to some of the other people on the tour, and it was a really fun tour. There were a lot of really nice people on it that we got to meet and talk to along the way. Then we went to, I think it was Localita Rignana.
That's pretty good, yeah.
And there we actually did an olive oil tasting.
Yes.
So they talked to us about olive oil and how they process olive oil. And they took us out to this little pavilion set on top of this hill overlooking these vineyards. And you've got vineyards over here and you've got olive trees over here. And they had us taste a couple of different olive oils. And it was literally like sipping olive oil out of little cups.
Yeah.
Which I was surprised by. I thought that we were going to be like dipping bread in it or something.
Right.
But like we were tasting the straight olive oil so that our tour guide could talk to us about what makes olive oil good and how you really want to look for the extra virgin olive oil and what those different things kind of mean. And he walked us all through that. And then we had lunch there. Like we went back up to kind of the chateau there. And again, it was this outdoor table under this awning overlooking the beautiful
Incredible
Tuscan
view.
Countryside. And they serve us all kinds of pasta and all kinds of stuff. And we just sat at this table and had this amazing lunch with all this wine, and it was
family style,
great.
Where everyone's just kind of passing around these plates, these dishes and sharing dishes and conversation. And we met couples from Boston and I'm trying to think of all the different places. I feel like mostly East Coast people.
Yeah, I feel like it was.
But like we got to meet all these different people, and I mean, by the time it was over with, we were like laughing, sharing crazy stories. One guy had met what's the actor that his dog took a picture. he took a picture of his dog.
Oh, with Steve Carell.
Steve Carell.
Yeah.
And we're like, we love Steve Carell. It was like such a fun story. And like, we're all sharing these stories. And then the guy that's our tour guide is just the life of the party.
Yeah.
What a fun guy to be around.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's just lighting up the other half of the table and just like all this conversation. And they really believe in enjoying your time at the table. And so we got to really enjoy our time at the table. It wasn't rushed or anything. And then, you know, after a nice long lunch, we get to like hop back in the air conditioned like Jeep. It was like this huge 4x4 army Jeep that fit a ton of people in it, and go off to the next place, which was Poggio Torselli.
Yes. Yeah.
Hope I say that right.
And like all the time that we're driving through this, it's the beautiful Tuscany that you're like driving through in between place to place. And so the countryside is just breathtaking. And this villa was amazing.
Yeah.
I thought that we would just kind of go to like a winery and see another winery, which they showed us that part of it, there where they processed the wine, took us down to the wine barrels and all that. But then they took us into the actual villa itself. This place was stunning.
So cool.
Just stunning. This long tree-lined driveway up to this villa, just hundreds of trees. And
those really tall, narrow trees, I can't remember the name of them, but like it is exactly what you imagine. In fact, it reminds me of that scene from Gladiator where his home is, and he always goes back in his memory to this home with like this long driveway with all these long, tall trees. And that is a lot what this looked like.
Yeah. It was definitely like that, perched up on top of this hill. And they took us into the great room of essentially, and there were a couple tables in there, and that's where we did our wine tasting for there. And it was just,
it was beautiful.
It was amazing.
It was so beautiful. And the thing that I find most interesting about that place is that it's a home. Somebody lives there.
Yeah, right.
Somebody lives there, and they let us in.
Yeah.
They let us come and like take over their massive formal dining room with these two huge long tables with all of this crazy stemware and all the things. And we got to like sit there again and like learn more about wine, but it's in this crazy elegant setting, which is totally different than sitting outside under a pavilion, you know, like that. It was nice, but this is like elegant, and you're just like, wow, this is such a different change of pace. And man, I loved it. And we learned a lot along the way. We learned all kinds of things. We'll rattle off some of that information in case you are interested in actually learning about wine. We did learn a lot, which was that vineyards are never planted in a valley. And if you guys heard our Bordeaux episode, some of this stuff is kind of similar information, you know. Stagnant water is a really bad thing. So if you're thinking that you are going to like start a vineyard, then you need to move to like Texas. Where it's really dry.
Yeah.
And there are parts of Texas, hill country Texas, it's very dry. That actually, if the water is too stagnant, it leads to molded grapes. That's not good. And that's why you always see vineyards in the hills. That's why Texas hill country is such a good place for wine. Yeah. Basically areas where nothing else will grow.
Really? Yeah.
Okay, so we went last year, 2022. The year before, 2021, was a really hard year for Italy. Not only were they dealing with COVID, which they didn't actually talk that much about, but think about it. They were dealing with COVID, the height of COVID. And while that's all happening, there was a drought that led farmers to lose 30% of their profit. They only take the best of a crop. So if there's not a great crop, there's just less to take. It's not like they're going to use bad crop. And they also aren't allowed to irrigate crops. That's really similar. That's all of the Chianti region, and it's really similar to the Bordeaux region of France.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting too. I'd never considered that they wouldn't be allowed to irrigate, and that you are completely dependent upon the rainfall for that year.
Yeah.
And 2021, it's not going to rain much, and there's not anything they can do about it. It's kind of crazy.
And it's like, you don't want too much rain. You can't be in an area with too much rain, but also you need enough to grow the crops. Yeah. It's kind of like that balance. But the other thing I thought was interesting is I've always been under the assumption that wines are better as they age. Somehow we heard that,
Right.
and that is the case with like champagne. Champagne gets better with age, is my understanding, but not necessarily the case with wine. So 2010, 2016, those were considered golden vintage years, excellent years for wine, at least European wines like Bordeaux and the Chianti region. And so now I look and I can't ever find that, which is probably because they're way too expensive. I have no clue, guys, but I have looked.
Yeah, it was interesting to find that like only the really fine wines are the ones that age really well.
Yeah.
And so you have to look for the right year and the right vintage if you're going to buy a bottle of wine and hang on to it in hopes that it will one day be that much better. Like you can't just do it with anything.
Yeah.
It was really interesting to hear all they talked about that. And with like the pruning, how they like prune it way down where there's only 2 shoots left. So that all the fruit is basically new. There's not like old fruit.
Well, and then the skins are added back to give the wine color. So red wine just has more skin on it. Like they've included more skin from the grape to make it more red. Interesting fact, Prosecco is the world's most sold wine. Grappa is like Italy's moonshine, if you think about it like that. It's a really strong, it's made from leftovers from the wine process, like the grape skin and stuff like that. I thought it was so interesting. We learned that the wine barrels are so expensive.
Yeah, for a good barrel, it's really expensive.
Yeah, like 500 to 1,000 euros if you buy it brand new. And then like a used one, you would just sell it for like 100.
Yeah.
Like it's not going to make much money at all.
Right.
So it's like you're spending a ton of money on your barrels alone, which would be a really good reason to age your wine in concrete, which is actually, it's the tradition there is to age their wine in concrete, and it doesn't take away from the flavor. And nobody really wanted concrete vats for a really long time, but they're kind of reverting back to it now, which I thought was really interesting. And then they commented that like stainless steel, you've got the stainless steel vats, and those actually give things a little different flavor. And
that whole process was so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and they told us all about olive oil on this tour too. Olive trees are found in most vineyards.
I know they do. If somebody has a winery, they probably also make olive oil.
Yeah, which was kind of crazy that you would see both there. I would thought it would be there's olive oil people over here and wine people over here, but they're really like they make a lot of both. And Chianti olive oil is expensive and has like a really strong, almost like a grassy kind of flavor to it. And it's a really good, high quality, like there's a little kind of grassy flavor and a little kind of pepper flavor to it. And
yeah, I remember like when we tried it, I was like, whoa, the pepper was like strong.
Yeah. And I thought that was so interesting. I've always kind of thought like, oh, olive oil is olive oil, but there's a huge difference. And they let us taste like sort of something that's not very good, a middle of the road, and then a really good one. And there was a big difference in all of them.
Yeah. Well, and then they mentioned that like olive trees actually live a really long time, like 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. I mean, that's a long time. They did comment that 1985 was the coldest winter that was ever on record. And so a lot of olive trees in the region didn't actually survive that. But in general, olive trees can survive 1,000 years.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. They did give us a little tips for like buying olive oil. They said unfiltered is not necessarily better.
Yeah.
And that's just sort of a marketing thing. And so if you see that, like that's something you can kind of ignore. They said you do want to look for extra virgin olive oil because that has only been pressed once. And so...
And no chemicals.
Yes, and there's no chemicals added. So the other stuff, if it's not extra virgin, it's probably the extra virgin has been extracted, and then everything gets pressed again. Sometimes chemicals get added, things like that. And so you really want to look for that label to know that it's really good.
Yeah. Well, and they also mentioned that like sometimes you might see labels that are are vague, and that's like intentional because lobbyist. And then they also mentioned that olive oil, the color of it isn't a reflection of the quality of it.
Right.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah, and you would think would not be the case.
Mm-hmm.
But they're like, no, it doesn't really matter.
That day was like so long for me. I was literally falling asleep. I mean, I had some wine as well, but I was like so tired and just beat, and I was like asleep on the bus. Like, yes. You could see that. If you only go watch the video just to see me like snoring on the bus, it's worth it. I was so tired.
Yeah. But there was no real time to rest because we were headed to Naples.
Naples and Pompeii.
Yeah.
Totally amazing. I've known very little about Pompeii in my adulthood until the more recent years. And it is this incredible story of a city buried underneath the ash of a volcano. You guys, I don't know why Americans don't know more about this, but it's incredible.
It really was something else.
What are some other things that we didn't do that you would recommend for people?
I think going into more of the museums, like the Accademia Gallery, where the real statue of David was. We mentioned that.
Yes.
Like, we tried to go, we couldn't get tickets. Same with the Uffizi Gallery, like amazing things to see. We tried to go, couldn't get tickets.
Yeah.
So I would definitely recommend that. Going up in the dome of the Duomo, I think would also be really interesting that we didn't actually get to do. It's an amazing, amazing city. And we are going to let you go on about your day as we head off to Naples on Pompeii. If you want to see more from our time in Florence, you can do that by following us on social media. We're all the places, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and then, of course, our YouTube channel where we have a video out where we kind of walk you through some of the stuff that we did. And you can see for yourself the gelato that we eat and the scenes that we saw. So you want to go check that out and make sure you subscribe and follow in all those places to get all the stuff as it releases and comes out.
Okay, so we know that Florence is really well traveled. So you may have been there yourself. And if that is the case, you should absolutely send us your stories so we can share that in a future podcast episode. We love being able to do that. You can email us at travelfomo, FOMO, podcast@gmail.com. It's an opportunity for us to tell your stories and to also better educate people than we may be doing because, we're just telling our stories. We're sharing the facts that we know, but we know that you have experienced your own travel adventures and have learned your own details. So share that with the world. Send us an email. You can just text, all that information to us in an email, just type it all up, or you can record a voice memo and hear your own voice on the podcast and really share your energy with us. We love to hear from you guys, and it doesn't matter if it's a good story or a bad story that you'd rather forget or a hilarious story. We are up for it all. So
yeah, send it
our way.
Send it our way. We're excited to hear.
Absolutely. Okay, guys, have a wonderful day because life is short.
Drink the wine.